Pranspe, and this is for Mr. Squire's AP US History class at Miami Valley School. This is going to be a brief summary and my views on Chapter 28, which is Progressivism and the Republican Roosevelt, 1901 to 1912. So I'll begin by quoting Mr. John Garrity from Columbia University on Roosevelt. Roosevelt was used dynamic use of the office of the president, a master at the manipulation of men and unmatched as a creator and leader of public opinion. He could be both subtle and direct, but whatever his method, he always saw government as a positive force, and the job of being president as the task of managing and directing that force effectively. At the same time, he never let himself be corrupted by power, for he respected the popular basic of democratic government, even while he insisted that a democratic government must be powerful and efficient. His success arose, however, more from his remarkable personality than his political philosophy. Master of every technique for attracting attention, he won the support of the people as much being himself energetic, colorful, insatiably curious, uninhibited, warm-hearted, as by any idea or policy that he ever advocated. And this is again by Mr. John A. Garrity of Columbia University. So my views on Mr. Roosevelt are positive. While many texts regard him as a progressive and liberal, however, many of his policies were actually moderate. I think his success is attributed more to the fact that he showed a remarkable sense of moderatism in both his economic policies with the trusts and his environmental policies. Many of his successes of his presidency could not have been accomplished without his great sense of moderatism, which I think is a lesson that some of our politicians today could learn. So I'll start off by quoting in chapter 28 of our text about Roosevelt. He concluded that there were good trusts with public consciences and bad trusts which lusted greedily for power. So this shows that the president not only understood that some trusts are good, but he also understood that some trusts must be broken. And many of his policies towards trusts were not necessarily for taking away all trusts. However, they were for proving a point. For example, 1907, he even allowed the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company to be acquired by the U.S. Steel Company. Now, this obviously increased the market share greatly of Mr. J.P. Morgan's U.S. Steel Company. However, President Roosevelt allowed it because he understood that the U.S. Steel Company was a good trust. It had a public conscience. So what he did by doing this, he did not anger his allies in the business world, but he still proved a point, which was that the president has official power. The president is the supreme commander of trust, and if there is a bad trust, the president can dissolve them. So I think that on one side, Roosevelt was careful not to dissolve the good trust, but on the other side, he was quick to dissolve any bad trusts. For example, another quote is, bigness was not necessarily badness, so why punish success? Roosevelt's real purpose in assaulting the Goliaths of the industry was symbolic, to prove conclusively that the government, not private business, ruled the country. He believed in regulating, not fragmenting, the big businesses' combines. The threat of dissolution, he felt, might make the sultans of the smokestack more amenable to federal regulation, and it did. By doing such a simple action as regulating some trusts, President Roosevelt proved his point. For example, in 1902, he attacked the Northern Securities Company, organized by Mr. J.P. Morgan, because they sought to achieve a virtual monopoly in the railroad industry. So he felt obviously this was unfair, so he dissolved them. And again, we see the same thing, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 and the Meat Inspection Act, also 1906. Here, Roosevelt did both. He helped the public, and he helped America economically by allowing its meat to be exported. So again, we see an example of where Roosevelt was a very moderate person. Unlike today, where we are factioned between the welfare-demanding staunch liberals versus the very conservative neocons, President Roosevelt was different. And again, we see the same thing in his environmental policy. For example, on page 718, we see the quote, the huge reach of these New Deal projects also introduced millions of Americans to the concept that nature had to be treated with respect, helping to stimulate the post-World War II grassroots environmental movement. So gradually, by a policy of moderatism, President Roosevelt was able to spur his own agenda, which was, and I think, environmentalism. We again see the same when under Roosevelt's policy of multiple-use resource management. In this policy, first of all, Roosevelt knew that the frontier was being rapidly diminished. In order to preserve an American identity that has been for the past 100 years at that time, we needed a large frontier. So in order, he knew that he needed to save the frontier. So what he did is, instead of completely banning all logging and mining, etc., from these lands, he used multiple-use resource management. So again, we see an example where Roosevelt was pleased both parties, both the staunch environmentalists and the capitalists. And again, we see an example where his follower, President Taft, failed in this policy of moderatism. We see Taft failed when he really angered the public when he dismissed Pinot, Pinchot, on the grounds of insubordination. However, this made a staunch divide in the Republican Party, which ultimately led to its Republican Party loss in the congressional elections of 1910. So if you see another example of where moderatism, or the lack of moderatism in Taft's administration, actually worked out against the Republican Party. So I think that to conclude, President Roosevelt was a champion of moderatism. Many of his policies, for example, breaking down some of the trusts, such as in 1902, when he broke down the trust, but however in 1907 when he let U.S. Steel acquire the Tennessee Valley Coal Company, many of those actions represent a policy of great moderatism. He experienced the same thing in his environmental policy with his multiple-use resource policy. So we see where Roosevelt's brilliance was keeping his public opinion high while still gradually accomplishing his agenda. Thank you.